The grizzly bear rose on its hind legs barely 10 feet from Clara Everett, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die in the Colorado wilderness on an otherwise beautiful September morning in 1878. The beast stood 8 feet tall, its massive head swaying as it sniffed the air, and its dark eyes locked onto her with the kind of hunger that made her knees buckle. She had wandered too far from the wagon train, drawn by the wild raspberries growing thick along the creek bed, and now she would pay for that foolishness with her life. The first gunshot split the air like thunder, but the bullet went wide. Clara watched in horror as the grizzly dropped to all fours and charged toward her, its enormous paws churning up dirt and pine needles. She stumbled backward, her basket of berries flying from her hands, red fruit scattering across the forest floor like drops of blood. Then she saw him, a mountain of a man bursting from the trees to her left, his long dark hair streaming behind him as he ran directly at the bear. He raised his rifle and fired again, and this time the shot hit the grizzly in the shoulder, but the wounded animal only roared louder and spun toward this new threat. Clara pressed herself against a massive pine tree, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The man was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they strained against his buckskin shirt. His arms were thick with muscle, and even in her terror, Clara noticed the way he moved with purpose and power. He fired a third shot, but the rifle clicked empty, and the grizzly was still coming, blood matting its brown fur but rage fueling its charge. What happened next defied all logic and self-preservation. The man reversed his grip on the rifle and swung the wooden stock like a club, connecting with the bear's massive skull with a crack that echoed through the forest. The grizzly swiped at him with claws that could disembowel a horse, and Clara screamed as those deadly talons ripped through the man's shirt and drew blood across his chest. But he did not fall. Instead, he swung again, putting all his considerable strength behind the blow, and this time the rifle butt caught the bear square in its sensitive nose. The grizzly shook its head, momentarily stunned, and the man used that precious second to reach down and pull a massive knife from his boot. Clara watched in disbelief as he drove the blade into the bear's neck, yanking it free only to plunge it in again. The bear roared and thrashed, but the man held on, his muscles bulging with the effort. Blood poured from the wounds, and finally, mercifully, the great beast collapsed onto the forest floor, its breathing coming in wet, labored gasps before going still. Silence descended on the forest, broken only by the sound of the man's heavy breathing and Clara's choked sobs. He stood there for a long moment, knife still gripped in his hand, his chest heaving beneath his torn and bloodied shirt. Then he turned to look at her, and Clara found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and wind and hard mountain living. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his long hair hung past his shoulders. Dark brown shot through with hints of copper where the sunlight caught it. "You hurt?" His voice was deep and rough, like gravel tumbling down a mountainside. Clara tried to answer, but her legs chose that moment to give out entirely. She slid down the tree trunk, her yellow calico dress catching on the bark, and suddenly he was there, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He sheathed his knife and reached for her, and Clara flinched instinctively, but his hands were impossibly gentle as they caught her arms. "Easy now," he said softly, and those huge, scarred hands that had just killed a grizzly bear with nothing but a rifle butt and a knife now held her as if she were made of the finest porcelain. "You are safe. I have got you." Clara looked up at him, at the concern etched across his rugged features, and burst into tears. Great, heaving sobs shook her into a body, and she felt him carefully lower them both to the ground, settling her against his chest as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He smelled of pine smoke and leather and something wild and clean that she could not name. One of his large hands came up to cradle the back of her head, his touch feather light despite the obvious strength in those calloused fingers. "Let it out," he murmured. "You have earned it." That was closer than it should have been. They sat there among the scattered raspberries and pine needles, while Clara cried and the dead grizzly cooled beside them. Slowly her sobs subsided into hiccups, and she became acutely aware that she was being held by a complete stranger in the middle of the wilderness. She pulled back slightly, and his arms immediately loosened, giving her space even though she could still feel the warmth of his body. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." He shrugged, which was remarkable considering he had just fought a grizzly bear. "Wrong place at the wrong time for both of us, I reckon. Though right place for you, considering." His blue eyes swept over her face, checking for injuries with a thoroughness that made her cheeks warm. "You are sure you are not hurt? No scratches, no bites?" "No, I am fine, just terrified." Clara looked at the blood seeping through his ruined shirt. "But you are hurt. Scratches, he said dismissively. I have had worse from angry bobcats. That needs cleaning and bandaging. Clara found her strength returning along with her sense of propriety. She pushed herself to her feet, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. I have supplies back at the wagon train. We are camped about a mile west of here. He stood as well, and Clara had to crane her neck to look up at him. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she could truly appreciate the sheer size of him. His arms were easily as thick as her thighs, and his chest was so broad she doubted her arms could reach around him. But it was his face that held her attention, those striking blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You should not wander off alone, he said, not unkindly. This is grizzly country, especially this time of year. They are fattening up for winter. I know that now. Clara looked at the dead bear and shuddered. I just saw the berries and thought I would pick some for preserves. We are heading to Florissant, Colorado. My uncle has land there. Something flickered across his face. Florissant, that is where I live, up in the mountains above town. Oh, Clara did not know what else to say. She bent to retrieve her fallen basket, but he reached it first, his long arms giving him the advantage. He handed it to her with that same gentle care, as if he feared his strength might crush the woven willow. I am Clara, she offered. Clara Everett. Colton Lawson. He paused, then added, most folks just call me the mountain man, or stay out of my way entirely. I prefer Colton if you do not mind. Clara smiled tentatively. It suits you better. He looked startled by that, as if no one had used his given name in a very long time. Before he could respond, voices called out from the direction of the wagon train. Clara recognized her cousin's voice, high and worried, shouting her name. Over here, Clara called back. I am all right. Colton took a step back, putting distance between them, and Clara felt an unexpected pang of loss. Within moments, her cousin James appeared through the trees, followed by 3 other men from the wagon train, all carrying rifles. They stopped short when they saw the dead Grizzly. Good Lord, James breathed. Clara, what happened? This man saved me. Clara gestured to Colton, who stood silent and still like a mountain himself. The bear was about to attack me and he fought it off. The men stared at Colton with a mixture of awe and wariness. Clara could see them taking in his size, his bloodied clothing, the massive knife at his belt. Mountain men had a reputation for being rough and dangerous, preferring the company of wilderness to civilization, and she could tell these settlers did not know quite what to make of him. We are in your debt, James said finally, extending his hand. James Everett. Clara is my cousin. Colton shook his hand, his grip firm but controlled. Colton Lawson, I was checking my trap lines when I heard the commotion. You fought a grizzly with your bare hands? One of the other men asked, his voice filled with disbelief. With my rifle butt and my knife, Colton corrected. And I would not recommend it as a first choice. Despite the tension, Clara found herself smiling. There was something about the dry way he delivered that statement, as if fighting grizzlies was merely inconvenient rather than terrifying. Come back to camp, James insisted. Let us clean those wounds and feed you a proper meal. It is the least we can do. Colton looked ready to refuse, but Clara caught his eye and nodded. Please, she said softly. I would feel terrible if those scratches got infected because you hurried back to your trap lines. He studied her for a long moment, and she got the distinct impression he was about to argue. Then something in his expression softened, and he gave a single nod. All right, but just for the bandaging. They walked back to the wagon train together, James and the other men peppering Colton with questions about the bear attack. Clara noticed how economically he answered, giving just enough information to satisfy their curiosity without volunteering anything about himself. She also noticed how he positioned himself between her and the forest, as if even now he was watching for danger. The wagon train consisted of 15 families, all heading to various parts of Colorado to start new lives. Clara had joined them in Independence, Missouri, after her parents died of fever the previous winter. Her uncle, her mother's brother, had written to say she could come live with him and his family in Florissant, where he ran a general store. It was charity, Clara knew, but she had nowhere else to go. When they reached the circled wagons, Clara's aunt, a stern woman named Margaret, took one look at Colton and crossed her arms. Who is this? My rescuer, Clara said firmly. He fought off a grizzly bear that was about to kill me, and he is injured. I am going to clean and bandage his wounds. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, but even she could not argue with that. Very well. But you will do it out here in the open, where everyone can see. It would not be proper otherwise. Clara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Colton showed no reaction. She fetched her medical supplies and a basin of water, then had him sit on the lowered tailgate of a wagon. In the full sunlight, the damage looked worse than she had first thought. The bear's claws had left 4 parallel gashes across his chest, each one deep enough to require careful attention. "This is going to sting," she warned, wetting a clean cloth with whiskey. "It already stings," Colton pointed out, but there was the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Clara began cleaning the wounds, working as gently as she could. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and she could feel the hard muscle underneath. He did not flinch or make a sound, even when she had to scrub away dried blood and forest debris. His silence was almost unnerving. "How long have you lived in these mountains?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the intimacy of touching him. 10 years, give or take." His voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. "Came out here after the war." "The war?" Clara glanced up at his face. "The war between the states. I fought for the Union, saw things a man should not see." His jaw tightened. "When it was over, I just kept moving west until I ran out of people." Clara absorbed that information as she worked. He would have been very young when the war started, probably only 18 or 19. Now he had to be close to 30, though the weathering of mountain life made him hard to age precisely. "Do you ever get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Those blue eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something vulnerable beneath the rugged exterior. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But people are complicated. Mountains are simple. I prefer simple." Clara tore strips of clean cloth and began bandaging his chest, wrapping the material around his torso. She had to reach around him to pass the bandages back and forth, bringing her close enough that she could feel his breath stirring her hair. Her hands shook slightly, though whether from the aftermath of her near-death experience or something else entirely, she could not say. "You have gentle hands," Colton said softly. "Healing hands. My mother was a nurse during the war. She taught me." Clara tied off the bandage and stepped back, suddenly needing distance. "There. That should hold, but you will need to change the dressing every day and watch for infection. I know how to tend wounds." But his tone was kind, not dismissive. "Thank you, Clara Everett." The way he said her full name sent an unexpected shiver through her. She busied herself with repacking her medical supplies, very aware that half the camp was watching them with undisguised curiosity. Mountain men were the stuff of legend out here, spoken of with equal parts respect and fear. They were men who had turned their backs on society, who lived by their wits and their strength in country that could kill you a dozen different ways. And yet this particular mountain man had held her with infinite care while she cried, and sat patiently while she bandaged his wounds. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked, knowing her aunt would disapprove but not caring. Colton stood, and once again Clara was struck by his sheer size. He towered over her, over everyone in the camp really, but somehow he did not make her feel small, protected perhaps, but not diminished. "I should get back," he said. "I have traps to check, and that bear has a hide worth keeping." "Of course." Clara tried to hide her disappointment. "Thank you again, for everything." He picked up his damaged rifle and started to leave, then paused and turned back. "How long will you be camped here?" "We leave tomorrow morning, first light. We should reach Florissant in 3 days if the weather holds." Colton nodded slowly. "Safe travels then, and stay close to the wagons. No more berry picking alone." He walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly toward the tree line. Clara watched him go, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating far too fast. She told herself it was just the lingering fear from the bear attack, but deep down she knew that was not entirely true. "That is a dangerous man," her aunt said, appearing at her elbow. "You would do well to forget about him." "He saved my life," Clara protested, "and we are grateful. But men like that are not meant for civilized company. He lives up in those mountains like a wild animal himself." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I know you are lonely, child, but trust me when I say that is not the kind of man you want to set your cap for." Clara did not bother arguing. Her aunt meant well, but she had no idea what she was talking about. Colton Lawson might live alone in the mountains, but there had been nothing wild or savage about the way he held her hand. Nothing dangerous about the careful gentleness in his touch as he cradled her head while she cried. If anything, he had shown her more tenderness in those few minutes than she had experienced in months. That night, Clara lay in her bedroll beneath the wagon and stared up at the stars visible between the wooden slats. She kept seeing those blue eyes, feeling those careful hands. She touched her own hand, remembering the way his fingers had been so cautious, as if he feared his strength might hurt her. A man who could beat a grizzly to death with a rifle butt had held her like she might break in 2 pieces, and something about that contrast had burrowed deep into her heart. She told herself she would probably never see him again. Florissant was a small town, but the mountains around it were vast. Men like Colton Lawson did not come down from their remote cabins very often. By the time she arrived in 3 days, This whole encounter would start to feel like a dream, something that happened to someone else. But sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of blue eyes and gentle hands and a voice like gravel saying her name. The journey to Florissant took 4 days instead of 3. A wheel broke on one of the wagons, requiring repairs, and they had to ford a swollen creek that cost them half a day. Clara spent the time helping her aunt with cooking and mending. Trying not to think about Colton, she failed miserably. Every time she saw dense forest, she wondered if he was out there somewhere, checking his trap lines or hunting elk or doing whatever it was mountain men did with their days. They arrived in Florissant on a golden afternoon in late September, the aspens already turning yellow on the mountainsides. The town was small, perhaps 200 souls all told, consisting of a main street with a general store, a saloon, a livery, a hotel, a church, and a handful of other businesses. Houses sprawled out from the center, and beyond them, the vast Colorado wilderness stretched in every direction. Clara's uncle, Thomas Everett, met them at the edge of town. He was a portly man with kind eyes and thinning hair, and he swept Clara into a warm embrace. "Welcome, welcome," he boomed. "Margaret, James, you made good time. And this must be Clara. My dear girl, how you have grown. I have not seen you since you were in pigtails." Clara smiled, warming to him immediately. "Thank you for taking me in, Uncle Thomas. I promise I will earn my keep." "Nonsense. You are family, though I will not turn down help at the store if you are willing. My back is not what it used to be, and hauling sacks of flour is getting harder every year." They settled into her uncle's house, a neat 2-story structure behind the general store. Clara was given a small room on the 2nd floor with a window overlooking the mountains. She unpacked her few belongings and tried to focus on starting this new chapter of her life, but her thoughts kept drifting to a certain blue-eyed mountain man. A week passed. Clara threw herself into helping at the store, learning the inventory and serving customers. She met the townspeople, a mix of ranchers, miners, and shop owners, all trying to carve out lives in this rugged country. Some were friendly, others reserved, but all of them were curious about the new girl in town. She did not see Colton. She told herself she had not expected to, but disappointment settled in her chest nonetheless. Then, on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after her arrival, the bell above the store's door chimed and Clara looked up from the ledger she was updating. Her breath caught in her throat. Colton Lawson stood in the doorway, looking impossibly large in the confines of the store. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, his face freshly shaved and his hair tied back with a leather cord, though he still wore buckskin and moccasins. His eyes found her immediately, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Hello," she said, acutely aware that her voice came out breathier than intended. "Miss Everett." He nodded formally, but his eyes were warm. "I heard you made it to town safely." "We did, thanks in no small part to you." Clara set down her pen, suddenly nervous. "How are your wounds healing?" "Fine, not even a scar." He moved further into the store, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. "I came to buy supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition." Of course, Clara bustled around, gathering the items he requested. Her hands trembled slightly as she measured out the flour, and she prayed he did not notice. "Have you been avoiding town, or is this just your regular schedule?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "I come down every few weeks, sometimes more often in winter when I cannot get out easily." "So you did not come specifically to check on me?" The words were out before Clara could stop them, and she felt her cheeks flame. "I apologize. That was terribly forward of me." Colton was quiet for so long that Clara was certain she had offended him. Then he said very softly, "Maybe I did a little." Clara looked up sharply and found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. There was something in his eyes, something uncertain and hopeful and almost afraid, as if he was not used to caring whether someone was all right. "I am glad you did," she said, just as quietly. "I have been hoping to see you again." "You have?" He sounded genuinely surprised. "You saved my life, Colton, and you were kind to me when I was frightened. Did you think I would just forget about you?" He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable despite his size. "Most people do. I am not exactly memorable." Clara laughed, unable to help herself. "You are the most memorable person I have ever met. You fought a grizzly bear with your rifle butt and then held my hand like it might break in 2 pieces. How could I possibly forget that?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features into something almost boyish. "I guess when you put it that way." The bell above the door chimed again, and a cluster of women entered, chattering among themselves. They fell silent when they saw Colton, giving him wary looks. Clara saw him tense, his shoulders going rigid, and she understood suddenly how uncomfortable he was around groups of people. "Your total is $4.50, she said quickly, wanting to give him an excuse to leave if he needed it. He paid. his fingers brushing hers as he handed over the coins. Even that brief contact sent warmth racing up her arm. He gathered his supplies, then hesitated. "Would you walk with me sometime?" The question came out rushed, as if he had to force it out before he lost his nerve. "I know a place with a view of the whole valley. It is beautiful this time of year. I would like that very much." Clara smiled, not caring that the other women were watching them with undisguised curiosity. "When? Tomorrow afternoon? I could meet you here around 2. Perfect." He nodded once, then left, moving quickly as if afraid he might change his mind. The women immediately descended on Clara with questions, but she barely heard them. All she could think about was tomorrow afternoon and whatever that view might look like. Her aunt was less enthusiastic when Clara told her about the planned walk. "That mountain man?" Margaret shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. It would not be proper for you to go walking alone with a man, especially one like him." "He saved my life," Clara argued. "And he was a perfect gentleman. He lives alone in the mountains like a hermit. Who knows what kind of man he really is?" "I know what kind of man he is. He is the kind who held me gently even though he had just killed a grizzly bear with his bare hands. The kind who asked permission instead of just assuming." Clara met her aunt's eyes steadily. "I am going, Aunt Margaret. I am 18 years old and capable of making my own decisions." "Your uncle will hear about this," Margaret warned, but her tone suggested she knew she had lost the argument. Uncle Thomas, when consulted, proved to be more sympathetic. "Let her go, Margaret. The girl has been through enough. If she wants to take a walk with a young man who saved her life, I see no harm in it. Colton Lawson might be rough around the edges, but he is honest. He has traded at my store for years and never caused any trouble." So the next afternoon, Clara put on her best dress, a blue calico that brought out her eyes, and waited outside the general store. She told herself not to get her hopes up, that this was just a friendly gesture and nothing more, but her racing heart did not believe her. Colton arrived exactly at 2, riding a sturdy mountain pony and leading another. He had cleaned up again, Clara noticed, and he looked at her with such open appreciation that she blushed. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." He dismounted and helped her onto the second horse with those careful hands, making sure she was secure before swinging back onto his own mount. They rode out of town, heading east, into the foothills where the aspens grew thick and golden. "How long have you been riding?" Colton asked as they climbed a narrow trail. "Since I was a girl. My father had a small farm in Ohio. We had 2 horses and I loved them both dearly." Clara paused, the memory bittersweet. "I had to sell them after my parents died. I needed the money for passage west." "I am sorry about your parents." "Thank you. The fever took them quickly at least. They did not suffer long." Clara shook off the melancholy. "Tell me about your place in the mountains. What is it like?" "Simple. I have a cabin in a high valley, good water from a spring, plenty of game. I run trap lines in winter, hunt in summer, and mostly keep to myself." He glanced at her. "It is not much, but it is mine. It sounds peaceful. It is. Though sometimes the quiet gets loud, if that makes any sense." Clara thought about that. "I think it does. When you are alone with your thoughts for too long, they start to echo." "Exactly." He looked pleased that she understood. "That is exactly it." They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the mountains. The aspens gave way to pine and spruce, and the air grew thinner and colder. Finally, Colton led them to a rocky outcropping that jutted out from the mountainside, and Clara gasped at the view. The entire valley spread below them, a patchwork of gold and green, with the town of Florissant, a tiny cluster of buildings in the distance. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow, and the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at it. "Oh, Colton," Clara breathed. "This is magnificent. I thought you might like it." He dismounted and came to help her down, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her easily from the saddle. For a moment they stood very close, and Clara could see the individual whiskers of his beard, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his pupils dilated as he looked at her. "Thank you for bringing me here," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." His voice was rough with emotion. "I was not sure you would." "Why would you think that?" He stepped back, putting distance between them, and walked to the edge of the outcropping. "Look at me, Clara. I am not the kind of man women want to spend time with. I live alone in the woods. I have more in common with the bears and the elk than I do with civilized folks. Your aunt thinks I am dangerous." Clara moved to stand beside him, looking out at the view. "My aunt thinks anyone who does not attend church every Sunday and gossip over tea is dangerous. She means well, but she does not understand that there are different ways to be a good person." "And you think I am a good person?" He sounded genuinely curious. "I think you are a kind person. A gentle person, despite all that strength." Clara reached out and took his hand, lacing her smaller fingers through his larger ones. I think you are someone who knows how to be careful with fragile things. That matters more than whether you prefer mountains to town." Colton looked down at their joined hands, and Clara watched emotions play across his face. Wonder, uncertainty, hope. Then he turned his hand over and held hers properly, his calloused palm warm against her softer skin. "I have not held someone's hand in over 10 years, he admitted quietly. "I forgot what it felt like. What does it feel like? Like maybe I have been lonely without realizing it." He squeezed gently, and Clara marveled again at how controlled his strength was. Like maybe the quiet does not have to be quite so loud anymore. They stood there for a long time, hands linked, watching the sun move across the sky and paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Clara had never felt so peaceful, so perfectly content, and when Colton finally spoke again, his words echoed her own thoughts. "I want to see you again. Not just once, if you are willing." "I am willing," Clara said immediately. "More than willing. People will talk. They already are, probably. Let them talk. I do not care what people say, Colton. I care about what I know to be true, and what I know is that you make me feel safe and valued and seen. That is not something I have had much of lately." He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "I am not good with words, Clara. I have spent too many years talking only to myself in the mountains. But I need you to know that meeting you has changed something in me. That day with the Grizzly, when I saw you in danger, something in my chest just cracked wide open. And then when I held you while you cried, it was like I remembered that there is more to life than just surviving, that maybe I could be part of something again." Clara's eyes stung with tears, but they were good tears. "You are already part of something. Part of this, whatever this is between us. It is too soon to call it anything," Colton said cautiously. "We barely know each other. Then let us get to know each other. Spend time together. See where it goes." Clara stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Unless you do not want that, I want it more than I have wanted anything in a very long time." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather light despite the strength in those fingers. "But I am afraid I will mess it up, that I will forget how to be around people and say the wrong thing or do something that frightens you." "You could never frighten me," Clara said fiercely. "Do you know why? Because you have already shown me who you are when the stakes are highest. You fought a bear to protect me, and then you held me with infinite gentleness when I needed comfort. Everything else is just details." Colton made a sound that was half laugh, half something else, and then he was gathering her into his arms. Clara went willingly, pressing her face against his broad chest and feeling his heart thunder beneath her cheek. His arms came around her, one hand cradling the back of her head just like he had done in the forest, and Clara felt something inside her settle into place, as if she had been searching for this exact feeling her whole life without knowing it. They held each other as the afternoon light turned golden, and when they finally pulled apart, Colton was smiling in a way that transformed his entire face. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. "I do not want your uncle thinking I kept you out past dark." They rode back to town more slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Clara learned that Colton had grown up in Pennsylvania, the youngest of 5 brothers. He learned that Clara had always wanted to be a teacher, but never had the opportunity. He told her about the time he accidentally tracked a wolverine into its den and had to back out very, very carefully. She told him about the summer she was 12 and tried to teach herself to play the piano using a book, resulting in noise so terrible her mother begged her to stop. By the time they reached the outskirts of Florissant, the sun was setting and Clara felt like she knew him better than people she had known her whole life. There was something about Colton's quiet honesty, his willingness to share the unvarnished truth about himself, that made conversation easy, despite his claim that he was bad with words. He helped her dismount in front of the general store, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "When can I see you again?" Clara asked, not caring if she sounded too eager. "Soon, maybe Wednesday? I need to check my trap lines, but I could come back down by then." "Wednesday is perfect." Clara smiled up at him, not wanting this day to end but knowing it must. "Thank you, Colton, for everything. Thank you for giving me a reason to come down from my mountain." He mounted his horse, then looked down at her with such warmth in his eyes that Clara felt it like a physical touch. "Stay safe, Clara Everett." "You too, Colton Lawson." She watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, then turned to find her uncle standing in the doorway of the store, grinning like a fool. "That is quite a young man you have there," Thomas said approvingly. "Strong as an ox but gentle as a lamb when it counts. Your aunt does not think much of him, but I say he is exactly the kind of man a woman can depend on." "I think you might be right, Uncle Thomas." Clara hugged him impulsively. "I think you might be exactly right." The next weeks fell into a pattern. Colton would come down from the mountains every few days, sometimes to buy supplies but mostly to see Clara. They took walks, went riding, sat by the creek that ran through town and talked until the stars came out. Clara learned that he read poetry in the long winter nights, that he had taught himself to play the harmonica, that he carved small wooden animals when he needed something to do with his hands. Colton learned that Clara loved to dance even though she rarely had the opportunity, that she could recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory, that she made the best apple pie he had ever tasted. The townspeople watched their courtship with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Some thought Clara was foolish to encourage a mountain man. Others, like Uncle Thomas, approved of the match. The local minister's wife took it upon herself to warn Clara about the dangers of marrying someone so removed from civilized society, but Clara politely ignored her. "I do not understand what you see in him," Aunt Margaret said one evening as they prepared dinner. "He barely speaks in company, he dresses like a savage, and he lives up in those mountains like some kind of wild creature." "He speaks plenty when we are alone," Clara replied calmly, "and I do not care how he dresses. As for living in the mountains, that just means he is strong and self-sufficient and capable of surviving in conditions that would kill most men." "Those are good qualities, Aunt Margaret. But what kind of life would you have with him? Stuck in some remote cabin, miles from the nearest neighbor, struggling just to stay alive through the winter?" Clara paused in her chopping. She had thought about this late at night when she could not sleep. A life with Colton would be hard in ways she had never experienced. But when she imagined the alternative, a safe, conventional marriage to some shopkeeper or rancher who would give her a comfortable life but never make her heart race the way it did when Colton smiled at her, the choice seemed obvious. "I would have a life with someone who loves me," Clara said softly. "Someone who treats me with gentleness and respect. Someone who makes me feel alive. That is worth more than comfort, Aunt Margaret." Her aunt said nothing more, but her expression suggested she thought Clara was making a terrible mistake. October arrived, bringing cold winds and the first real snowfall. Colton came to town one afternoon looking troubled, and Clara immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, pulling him aside from the afternoon bustle of the store. "Big storm coming," he said shortly. "I can feel it in my bones. It is going to be bad, Clara. Might last days. I need to get back to my cabin and make sure everything is secure before it hits." "When will you come back down?" "I do not know. Could be a week, could be more. Depends on the snow." He took her hands, holding them carefully. "I do not want to leave you, but I have to. I have got animals depending on me, supplies I need to protect, I understand." Clara squeezed his hands, trying to ignore the cold fear settling in her stomach. A week or more without seeing him felt like an eternity. "Just promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will come back. I promise." He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the store with people watching, and kissed the top of her head. "I will always come back to you, Clara. No storm or bear or anything else could keep me away." He left within the hour, riding hard for the mountains. Clara watched him go with a heavy heart, and that night the storm hit with a vengeance. Snow fell in thick sheets, driven by winds that howled like wolves. It continued for 3 days without stopping, piling up drifts higher than a man's head, burying the town in white. On the 4th day, the snow stopped and an eerie silence fell over Florissant. Clara helped her uncle dig out the store, but her mind was in the mountains with Colton. Was he safe? Did he have enough food and firewood? What if something had happened to him? A week passed, then 2. The snow stayed deep and the temperatures plummeted. Colton did not come to town, but Clara told herself that was just because the conditions were too dangerous. He was fine. He had to be fine. But as the 3rd week began, her worry turned to real fear. She sought out men who knew the mountains, asking about conditions, about whether someone could survive up there alone. Most tried to reassure her, but she saw the concern in their eyes. The storm had been unusually severe. If someone was not prepared, if their cabin was not sound or their supplies were insufficient, they could be in serious trouble. "I need to go check on him," Clara announced at dinner one evening. "Absolutely not," Aunt Margaret said immediately. "It is far too dangerous." "Then someone needs to go. What if he is hurt? What if he needs help?" Uncle Thomas exchanged a look with his wife. "I will ask around, see if anyone is willing to make the trip. But Clara, you have to understand, even experienced mountain men do not go into the high country this time of year unless they have to. It is suicide." The men Clara approached all gave her sympathetic looks but firm refusals. The snow was too deep, the cold too severe, the risks too high. If Colton Lawson was in trouble, there was nothing anyone could do until the weather improved. Clara lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, terrified. She thought about Colton alone in his cabin, maybe injured or sick or worse. She thought about never seeing him again, never hearing his deep voice or feeling his careful hands. The thought was unbearable. The next morning, she woke to the sound of someone pounding on the door downstairs. Clara threw on her robe and rushed down to find her uncle already opening the door, and there, covered in snow and ice, his beard frozen and his face red from cold, stood Colton Lawson. "Colton!" Clara flew across the room, not caring that she was in her nightclothes or that her hair was loose around her shoulders. She crashed into him and his arms came around her automatically, though he was shaking with cold. "I am sorry," he said through chattering teeth. "I am sorry I was gone so long. The snow was too deep to get the horses through. I had to walk, and it took forever." "You walked?" Clara pulled back to stare at him in horror. "You walked through 3 weeks of accumulated snow to get here?" "I had to. I knew you would worry, and I could not stand the thought of you thinking I was dead or hurt." His hands came up to frame her face, his fingers like ice against her skin. "I promised I would come back to you. I keep my promises." Uncle Thomas sprang into action, ushering Colton to a chair by the fire and calling for blankets and hot coffee. Clara knelt in front of him, pulling off his frozen boots and chafing his cold feet between her hands. Colton watched her with such naked emotion that it made her throat tight. "You could have died," she whispered. "Making that journey alone in these conditions, you could have frozen to death. But I did not, and I would do it again." His voice was stronger now as the warmth of the fire started to reach him. "Clara, these past 3 weeks, stuck in my cabin with nothing but my thoughts, I realized something. I realized that I do not want to live up there alone anymore. I do not want to be the hermit who comes down from the mountain every few weeks. I want to be part of the world again. I want to be part of your world." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you." The words came out fierce and certain, as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I love you, Clara Everett, and I want to marry you if you will have me. I know I do not have much to offer, just a cabin and some trap lines and a whole lot of rough edges. But I swear I will spend every day of my life treating you like you are made of precious glass. I will hold your hand like it might break in 2 pieces, and I will fight any bear or storm or obstacle that threatens you. I will love you with everything I have if you will just say yes." Clara was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Colton surged forward, pulling her into his lap despite his frozen clothes, and kissed her. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. His lips were cold but warming quickly, and he kissed her with a gentleness that made her melt against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara realized that her aunt was standing in the doorway looking scandalized, and her uncle was grinning like he had just won a bet. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Uncle Thomas said diplomatically. "This is highly irregular," Aunt Margaret protested. "You have only known each other a few months." "I knew after one day," Colton said firmly, his arms tightening around Clara. "The day I fought that grizzly and held her while she cried. I knew then that she was going to change my life, and I was right." "When do you want to get married?" Clara asked, still tucked against his chest. "Tomorrow, if the minister will do it." Colton paused. "Unless you want to wait? I know it is fast, and you might want a proper wedding with time to prepare and all that." "I do not need a proper wedding. I just need you." Clara kissed him again, quick and sweet. "But maybe we should wait until you thaw out completely, and perhaps we should discuss where we are going to live." That was a practical consideration Clara had been avoiding thinking about. She loved the idea of being with Colton, but she was not sure she was ready to live in complete isolation in the mountains, and she suspected he knew that. "I have been thinking about that," Colton said slowly. "What if we built a house here in town? Nothing fancy, just something solid. I could still trap and hunt, but we would have neighbors and you would not be alone when I am gone. And maybe," he hesitated, "maybe I could learn to do something else too. Your uncle mentioned he could use help with heavy work at the store. I am not afraid of labor." "You would do that?" Clara searched his face. "You would give up your cabin and your solitude for me?" In a heartbeat. His blue eyes were serious and steady. "That cabin was just a place to hide from the world, but I am done hiding. I want to build a life with you, Clara. A real life, with a home and maybe children someday, and all the messy, complicated, beautiful things that come with actually living instead of just surviving." Clara looked at her uncle, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be glad for the help, Colton. And there is a nice lot on the edge of town that would be perfect for building. Good water access, close enough to be convenient, but far enough for privacy. Then it is settled." Colton smiled down at Clara. "We will build a house and get married and start our life together. How does that sound?" It sounds perfect. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. Absolutely perfect. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the center of town. Clara wore a simple white dress that her aunt helped her make, and Colton wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, though he drew the line at a tie. He stood at the altar looking terrified and hopeful in equal measure, his eyes never leaving Clara's face as she walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm. The vows they exchanged were traditional. But when Colton slipped the plain gold ring onto Clara's finger, his hands were shaking. She squeezed his fingers reassuringly and he smiled, that transformative smile that made him look years younger. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Colton cupped Clara's face in both hands, those careful hands that had held her like she might break, and kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. When they turned to face the gathered townspeople as husband and wife, Clara felt like she might float away from pure happiness. The reception was held at the general store, with food and music and dancing. Colton was clearly uncomfortable with so many people, but he stayed by Clara's side and even agreed to one dance. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her through the steps with the same careful control he brought to everything. "Are you all right?" Clara asked quietly as they swayed to the music. "I know this is not easy for you." "I am perfect," Colton said honestly. "A little overwhelmed but perfect because I am married to you now, and that makes everything else bearable." "We can leave whenever you want," Clara offered. "Not yet. You are enjoying yourself, and I like watching you happy." He pulled her a little closer. "Besides, your uncle has been plying me with whiskey, so I am more relaxed than I would normally be." Clara laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Just do not get too relaxed. We still have to make it to our temporary lodging." They were staying at the hotel until their house was finished. Colton had been working on it for the past 2 weeks, with help from Uncle Thomas and several other townsmen. It was coming together quickly, a solid structure with a large main room, a separate bedroom, and a loft that could eventually serve as a nursery. Clara had watched it rise from the foundation with growing excitement, imagining their life there. Finally, as the evening wore on and the crowd began to thin, they made their escape. Colton scooped Clara up in his arms, ignoring her laughing protests, and carried her out of the store and down the street to the hotel. People called out good-natured comments, but he ignored them all, focused entirely on his bride. Their room was small but clean, with a large bed covered in a quilt that Clara's aunt had grudgingly contributed. Colton set Clara down carefully, then seemed suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. "Are you nervous?" Clara asked gently. "Terrified," he admitted. "I have not been with a woman in over 10 years, Clara, and I have never been with someone I actually love. What if I do something wrong? What if I hurt you?" Clara stepped close and took his hands, holding them between hers. "You could never hurt me. I trust you completely, Colton. Just be gentle the way you always are and everything will be fine." What happened next was private and sacred, but it sealed their union in a way that words never could. Colton was indeed gentle, almost excessively so at first, until Clara pulled him closer and whispered that she was not made of glass after all. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Colton's arms wrapped protectively around his wife. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I will never get tired of saying that. I love you too." Clara traced lazy patterns on his chest, marveling at the solid strength of him. "And I will never get tired of hearing it." They fell asleep like that, wound around each other, and when Clara woke in the early morning light to find Colton watching her with wonder in his eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The winter passed in a blur of activity. Colton finished their house and they moved in on a cold January day, carrying their few possessions from the hotel. Clara spent her time making the house a home, sewing curtains and arranging furniture and cooking meals on the new stove that Colton had installed. He continued working at the general store, surprising everyone with his head for numbers and his willingness to listen to customers. "You have a gift for this," Uncle Thomas told him one afternoon. "People trust you. They know you will not try to sell them something they do not need." Colton looked uncomfortable with the praise, but Clara saw how he stood a little straighter after that. He was finding his place in the community, slowly but surely, and she was proud of him for trying so hard. In February, Clara realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Colton, worried about how he might react. They had not discussed children beyond vague mentions of someday. She found him in their bedroom one evening, cleaning his rifle with meticulous care. "Colton, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, his expression shifting to concern at her serious tone. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." Clara sat beside him on the bed, taking his hand. In fact, something is very right. I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby. For a long moment, Colton just stared at her. Then his face crumpled, and to Clara's shock, tears started rolling down his cheeks. A baby? His voice cracked. We are going to have a baby? We are. Clara found herself crying too, though she was smiling through the tears. Are you happy? Happy? Colton pulled her into his arms, holding her with that infinite care. Clara, I am terrified and thrilled and so full of love I think I might burst. A baby. Our baby. I am going to be a father. He said those last words with such wonder that Clara's heart ached. She pulled back to look at him, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. You are going to be an amazing father. You will teach our child to be strong and kind, to respect the land, to treat people gently even when the world is hard. I will try, Colton promised. I will try so hard, Clara. I want to give our child everything I never had. Security, love, a real home. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Clara's belly grew round, and Colton treated her like she was made of spun glass, constantly worrying that she was doing too much or lifting something too heavy. It was sweet but occasionally frustrating. I am pregnant, not dying, Clara protested one afternoon when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that weighed perhaps 10 pounds. I can still do normal things. I know, but what if something happens? What if you strain yourself? Colton looked genuinely worried. I could not bear it if something happened to you or the baby because I let you overdo it. Clara softened, seeing the real fear beneath his hovering. Nothing is going to happen, but if it makes you feel better to carry things and fuss over me, then I suppose I can endure it. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for putting up with me. The baby came on a hot August night, arriving after 12 hours of labor that left both Clara and Colton exhausted. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Johnson, handled everything with calm efficiency while Colton paced outside the bedroom, occasionally bursting in to check on Clara until Mrs. Johnson threatened to ban him entirely. Finally, as dawn was breaking, a baby's cry split the air. Colton froze mid-pace, then rushed to the bedroom door. Mrs. Johnson appeared moments later, smiling. You have a son, she announced. Healthy lungs, all his fingers and toes, and mad as a hornet at being born. Your wife would like to see you now. Colton entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Clara lay propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he approached, her face shining with joy and tears. Come meet your son, she said softly. Colton knelt beside the bed, staring at the tiny red-faced baby with absolute wonder. He is so small, he whispered, as if afraid his voice might damage the child. He will grow. Clara shifted the bundle toward him. Do you want to hold him? I might drop him. My hands are too big, too rough. Your hands are perfect. Clara carefully transferred the baby to Colton's arms, showing him how to support the head. See, you are already doing it right. Colton looked down at his son, his large hands cradling the baby with exquisite gentleness, and Clara watched emotions flicker across his face too fast to name. Love, certainly. Fear, pride, wonder. The baby yawned, revealing pink gums, and Colton made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Hello, little one, he murmured. I am your father. I know I do not look like much, and I am going to make mistakes, but I promise I will always keep you safe. I will always hold you carefully, and I will teach you to be strong and kind, and I will love you more than I thought it was possible to love anything. He looked up at Clara, tears streaming into his beard. What should we call him? They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite now. Looking at her husband holding their son with such tender care, Clara knew exactly what his name should be. Carter, she said. Carter Thomas Lawson, after both of our fathers. Carter Thomas Lawson, Colton repeated, testing the name. I like it. It is a strong name. He carefully handed the baby back to Clara and kissed them both. Thank you. Thank you for him, for everything. You have given me a life I never dreamed I could have. We gave each other that life, Clara corrected, together. The years that followed were full and rich. Carter grew from a tiny baby into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's smile. Colton proved to be exactly the father Clara had known he would be, patient and protective and endlessly gentle with his son. He taught Carter to walk by holding his tiny hands carefully, to speak by reading to him every night, and as the boy grew older, to respect the wilderness that surrounded their town. Their house filled with love and laughter. Clara continued helping at the general store, bringing Carter with her when he was small, and later leaving him with Aunt Margaret, who had softened considerably toward Colton after seeing what a devoted husband and father he was. Colton divided his time between the store and occasional hunting trips into the mountains, always coming back with meat for their table and stories for Carter about the elk and deer he had seen. When Carter was 3, Clara became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and Colton was slightly less terrified, though he still hovered anxiously throughout the pregnancy. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose, arrived on a snowy December morning, and if possible, Colton was even more besotted with her than he had been with Carter. "She is perfect," he breathed, holding the tiny pink bundle with his usual careful grace. "Absolutely perfect." "She looks like you," Clara observed, noting the baby's dark hair and strong features. "She is going to be a heartbreaker when she grows up." "No, boys," Colton said immediately. "I will build a very tall fence and install a gate that only I can open." Clara laughed, exhausted and happy. "That is not how it works, and you know it. A man can try." But he was smiling as he said it, clearly joking. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the town prospered, and Colton became a respected member of the community despite his rough origins. He never lost his preference for quiet and solitude, but he learned to navigate social situations with Clara by his side, and people came to value his honesty and his steady presence. Uncle Thomas eventually retired and sold the general store to Colton and Clara, who ran it together with quiet efficiency. They were a good team, Clara handling the customers and bookkeeping while Colton managed inventory and heavy labor. The store thrived under their management, becoming the heart of Florissant's small but growing business district. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Colton surprised Clara by taking her back to the rocky outcropping where he had first told her he loved her. The children stayed with Aunt Margaret, and they rode up the mountain together just as they had done years before. The aspens were gold again, just as they had been that first time, and the view was just as breathtaking. "Do you remember what I said here?" Colton asked as they stood looking out over the valley. "You said you loved me, that you wanted to marry me and spend your life treating me like I was precious, and have I kept that promise?" His voice was uncertain, as if he genuinely did not know the answer. Clara turned to look at him, this man who had fought a grizzly bear with his rifle butt to protect her, who held her hand like it might break in 2 pieces, who had given up his solitary mountain life to build a family with her. His face was more weathered now, lines around his eyes from laughter and sun, but those blue eyes were the same, filled with the same wonder and love they had held on their wedding day. "You have kept it every single day," Clara said firmly. "Every time you wake up early to stoke the fire so I do not get cold. Every time you help Carter with his reading even though you are exhausted from work. Every time you rock Catherine to sleep singing those old songs your mother taught you. Every time you hold my hand or kiss my forehead or look at me like I am the best thing that ever happened to you. You have kept your promise 1,000 times over, Colton Lawson." He pulled her close, and they stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the sun painted the mountains gold. "I still cannot believe you chose me," he said quietly. "Some rough mountain man with more scars than sense. I chose you because you are the kindest, bravest, most loving man I have ever known." Clara rose on her toes to kiss him. "And I would choose you again every single time." They stood there until the sun began to set, then rode back down to town and their children and their life together. It was not always easy. There were hard winters and lean times, arguments and worries about money and the children. But through it all they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Carter grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet strength and careful hands. Catherine was fierce and independent, climbing trees and catching frogs with her brother, and declaring that she was going to be a mountain guide when she grew up. Colton taught them both to ride and track and respect the wilderness, and Clara taught them to read and write and think for themselves. When Carter was 10 and Catherine was 7, a travel photographer came through Florissant offering to take family portraits. Clara insisted they have one made, and Colton grumbled but agreed. The resulting photograph showed them all standing in front of their house, Colton towering over everyone with his hands resting protectively on his children's shoulders. Clara beside him with her hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, all of them smiling at the camera. Clara had the photograph framed and hung it in their main room, and sometimes she would catch Colton standing in front of it, staring at the image with an expression of profound gratitude. He never said what he was thinking in those moments, but Clara knew. He was remembering the lonely man he had been before, living isolated in the mountains, and marveling at how different his life was now. More years passed. Carter fell in love with a rancher's daughter and married her in the same church where his parents had wed. Catherine eventually did become a guide, leading hunting parties into the mountains with her father's blessing and her mother's worry. More grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and laughter. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Clara woke to find Colton already awake, watching her in the early morning light. His hair was shot through with silver now, and his face was deeply lined. But his eyes were the same piercing blue, and the way he looked at her had not changed. "Good morning," she murmured, reaching up to touch his bearded cheek. "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. 20 years. Can you believe it has been 20 years? Some days it feels like forever. Other days it feels like yesterday, Clara smiled. "Are you happy, Colton? Truly happy? Happier than I ever thought possible." He laced his fingers through hers, holding her hand with that same careful gentleness he had shown from the beginning. "Do you know what I think about sometimes? That day with the Grizzly. How easily things could have gone differently. How if I had been 5 minutes later, or if my aim had been better and I had dropped the bear with my first shot, we might never have really met. We might have just been two people who crossed paths briefly and moved on. But we did meet, and we fell in love, and we built this life together." Clara squeezed his hand. "No bear or storm or obstacle could have stopped that, Colton. We were meant to find each other. I believe that." He pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "I believe we were meant to be exactly here, exactly now, with our children and grandchildren, and this life we have made. And I believe I will love you until the day I die and beyond. Clara Everett Lawson. And I will love you just as long, Colton Thomas Lawson. My mountain man, my gentle giant, my everything." They lay there as the sun rose, illuminating their bedroom with golden light, holding each other the way they had been holding each other for 20 years, carefully and completely. As if nothing else in the world mattered but this moment and this love, the years continued to roll past as years do. Clara and Colton grew older, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but the love between them never dimmed. They celebrated each anniversary, each birthday, each small victory, and weathered each challenge together. Carter and his wife gave them 4 grandchildren. Catherine, who married a fellow guide, gave them 3 more. The house that had once held just the 2 of them now rang with the sounds of multiple generations. On autumn evenings, Colton and Clara would sit on their porch, hands linked, watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes the grandchildren would climb into their laps, begging for stories, and Colton would tell them about the time he fought a grizzly bear to save their grandmother. The children's eyes would go wide with wonder, and they would look at Clara as if she were a princess from a fairy tale. "Tell us how you fell in love," the children would beg, and Clara would smile and begin the story. How she had wandered too far from the wagon train. How a mountain man with blue eyes and gentle hands had saved her life. How he had held her while she cried, and later held her hand like it might break in 2 pieces. How she had known even then that he was someone special. Someone worth choosing, worth loving, worth building a life with. And they lived happily ever after. The youngest grandchild would always ask. "Yes," Colton would say, squeezing Clara's hand. "Yes, we did. We really did." When Colton was 62, he fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For days he burned with fever, and Clara sat by his bedside, bathing his face with cool cloths and whispering prayers she had not said since childhood. The doctor came and went, shaking his head gravely, and Clara refused to leave her husband's side. "You cannot leave me," she whispered fiercely, gripping his hand. "Not yet, Colton Lawson. We have too much left to do, too many grandchildren to spoil, too many sunsets to watch together. You promised you would always come back to me, and I am holding you to that promise." Whether he heard her or not, she would never know, but on the 5th day his fever broke. He woke weak and confused but alive, and the first thing he did was reach for Clara's hand. She took it, holding it carefully, and cried tears of relief. "I am not done with you yet," he rasped, his voice hoarse from coughing. "Need more time. Need to see those grandchildren grow up. Need to hold your hand every morning and every night." "Then you had better get better," Clara said, trying to sound stern but failing completely. "Because I am not done with you either." He recovered slowly, his strength returning day by day. The illness had aged him, Clara could see that, but it had also reminded them both how precious their time together was. They made a silent pact to appreciate each moment, each touch, each quiet evening on the porch. Their 30th anniversary was a grand celebration, with all their children and grandchildren gathered. The town threw a party at the general store, and people came from miles around to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in Florissant. The mountain man who had fought a grizzly and the brave woman who had civilized him, people said, though Clara always corrected that telling. He did not need civilizing, she would say firmly. He just needed someone to love him exactly as he was. They cut a massive cake that Catherine had baked, and Carter gave a toast that left everyone misty-eyed. Then Colton stood, which surprised everyone because he rarely spoke in public even after all these years. "I am not good with words," he began, his deep voice carrying across the crowded store. Never have been. But I need to say something today while I have all of you here as witnesses. 30 years ago, I was a man living alone in the mountains, convinced that was all I deserved or wanted. Then I met a woman picking raspberries in bear country and everything changed. Clara Everett gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. She gave me love, children, grandchildren, a home, a purpose. She took a rough mountain man with more scars than sense and treated him like he was worth something. Like he was worth everything. He turned to look at Clara, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Lawson, and I would fight 1,000 grizzly bears if it meant having 30 more years with you." Clara was crying openly now, as was half the room. She stood and went to him, and he gathered her into his arms the way he had done 1,000 times before, carefully and completely, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," she said against his chest. "I love you so much, Colton. Thank you for being my mountain man, my gentle giant, my forever love." They stayed in that embrace while people clapped and whistled, and Catherine started playing her father's old harmonica, the one he had taught himself on during those lonely winters before Clara. The music was sweet and melancholy, and Colton pulled Clara into a slow dance right there in the middle of the general store they had run together for decades. "Do you remember our wedding?" Clara asked as they swayed. "You were so nervous. I was terrified I would step on your feet." Colton smiled down at her. "I am still terrified of that, actually. These feet are not as nimble as they used to be. Your feet are perfect. Everything about you is perfect. Now I know you have gone soft in your old age," he teased gently. "I have never been perfect, Clara. But I have always tried to be good enough for you. You have always been more than good enough." Clara rested her head against his chest, hearing his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. "You have been everything." The party continued late into the night, but eventually Clara and Colton slipped away, walking hand in hand back to their house. The night was cool and clear, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, and the mountains rose dark and massive against the horizon. "I love this place," Clara said softly. "I love the life we have built here." "Me too." Colton squeezed her hand. "Though I have to admit, sometimes I miss the simplicity of those early days. Just you and me, building our house, figuring out how to be married, everything new and exciting." "Life is still exciting," Clara protested. "Just in different ways. Grandchildren are exciting. Watching our children become parents is exciting. Growing old together is exciting." "You are right." He stopped walking and turned to face her, cupping her faces in his large weathered hands. "Every day with you is an adventure, Clara Lawson. Even the quiet days, even the ordinary days. Because they are days I get to spend with you, and that makes them extraordinary." They kissed there under the stars, two people who had loved each other for 30 years, and would love each other for however many more they were granted. Then they went inside their house, the house Colton had built with his own hands, and went to bed in each other's arms. Just as they had done thousands of times before, the seasons turned. More grandchildren arrived. Colton's hair went completely silver, and Clara's hands developed arthritis that made her wince when the weather changed. But they were together, and that was what mattered. They held each other every night, held hands every day, and spoke their love in 1,000 small ways that needed no words. On a crisp October morning in their 37th year of marriage, Clara woke to find Colton standing at their bedroom window, looking out at the mountains. The sun was just rising, painting everything gold and pink, and he stood silhouetted against the light. She watched him for a long moment, admiring the lines of his body, still strong despite his age, still capable, still hers. "Come back to bed," she called softly. "It is too early to be awake." He turned, and the smile he gave her was the same smile he had given her that day on the mountainside when she said she would marry him. Full of wonder and love and gratitude. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am. How improbable this all is. That I was in the right place at the right time to save you from that bear. That you looked at me and saw something worth loving instead of just a rough mountain man." "I saw the real you," Clara said, patting the bed beside her. "And the real you is the best man I have ever known. Now come here and hold my hand before I get cold." He crossed the room and climbed back into bed, gathering her close. She nestled against him, her head on his chest, his arms around her, his hands, those careful hands that had held her like she might break in 2 pieces for 37 years, stroked her hair gently. "I love you, Clara. I love you too, Colton. Always and forever, he echoed, and they lay there in the golden morning light, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would last for all their days. Years continued to pass, but Clara and Colton faced them together. When Colton's knees finally gave out, and he could no longer make the long trips into the mountains, Clara suggested they hire someone young to help with the heavy work at the store. When Clara's eyesight began to fail and reading became difficult, Colton read to her every evening, his voice as deep and steady as it had been when he read to their children. They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. Carter gave them a rocking chair he had built himself, and Catherine gave them a quilt she had sewn with patches from all their old clothes, pieces of their life together, stitched into something warm and beautiful. "It is perfect," Clara said, running her fingers over the patches. She could identify each one by touch. Colton's old buckskin shirt, the one he had been wearing when they met. Her yellow calico dress from the wagon train. Carter's baby blanket. Catherine's first dress. Pieces of their children's wedding clothes. Scraps of fabric from grandchildren's quilts. It was their whole life captured in fabric. That night they sat in their new rocking chair together, somehow both fitting despite Colton's size, wrapped in their quilt and watching the stars. They had done this thousands of times, but it never got old. Clara reached for Colton's hand, and he took it automatically, holding it with the same gentle care he always had. "Do you have any regrets?" Clara asked suddenly. "About leaving your mountain cabin? About giving up that solitary life?" "Not a single one." Colton's answer was immediate and certain. "That was not living, Clara. That was just existing. You taught me the difference. You taught me that strength is not just about surviving alone, it is about having the courage to let people in, to build connections, to love someone so much that the thought of losing them terrifies you, but you do it anyway because the alternative is worse." "You taught me things too," Clara said softly. "You taught me that gentleness and strength are not opposites, that the biggest, roughest, most capable man can also be the kindest, that someone can hold your hand like it might break while also having the power to fight off a grizzly bear." "That grizzly really did change both our lives," Colton mused. "No, you changed my life. The grizzly just brought us together." Clara squeezed his hand. "Though I would prefer not to repeat that particular experience." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Agreed. One grizzly bear fight is quite enough for a lifetime." They sat there until the cold drove them inside, then went to bed wrapped around each other, warm beneath their patchwork quilt. Clara lay awake for a while after Colton's breathing deepened into sleep, studying his face in the moonlight. He was older now, his face deeply lined, his beard completely silver, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work and mountain living. But to her, he was still the most beautiful man she had ever seen. Still her protector, her gentle giant, her love. "Thank you," she whispered, though he could not hear her. "Thank you for fighting that bear. Thank you for being gentle. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for every single day we have had together." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder and closed her eyes, drifting off to sleep with his arm wrapped around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Their 45th anniversary arrived with spring flowers and warm breezes. They were both in their late 60s now, moving more slowly but still holding hands every day. The general store was fully run by Carter now, though Colton still came by most days to help however he could. Clara spent her time with their grandchildren, teaching them to read and telling them stories, passing down the history of their family. One afternoon, a young couple came into the store, clearly new to Florissant. The woman was pregnant, and the man had his arm protectively around her. They looked overwhelmed and a little frightened, the way newcomers often did. "Can I help you?" Colton asked in his gentle way. "We just arrived," the man said, "looking to start a life here. We heard Florissant was a good town for families." "It is," Colton confirmed. "The best town I know, actually. My wife and I have been here nearly 50 years. 50 years, the woman breathed. "That must be wonderful, to have that kind of history somewhere." "It has been more than wonderful. It has been a blessing." Colton smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "I came here as a mountain man with nothing but a rifle and a knife. Met my wife when I fought off a grizzly bear that was about to attack her. Married her a few weeks later, built a house, raised a family. This town gave us everything." The young couple's eyes went wide. "You fought a grizzly bear?" "With my rifle butt when my bullets ran out." Colton nodded. "Not something I recommend, but sometimes you do what you have to do to protect what matters." "That is incredibly brave," the man said with obvious admiration. "Not brave, just necessary." Colton began gathering the supplies they needed. The brave part was what came after. Building a life with someone, raising children, being part of a community. That takes a different kind of courage, but it is worth it. Every difficult day, every challenge, every moment of doubt. It is all worth it when you have someone to share it with. The young couple left with their supplies and a renewed sense of hope. Colton watched them go, then smiled to himself. He remembered being that young, that uncertain, that terrified of the future, and he remembered Clara standing beside him, holding his hand, telling him everything would be all right. When he got home that evening, he found Clara in their garden, tending the vegetables she planted every spring. She looked up when she heard him, and her face lit up with the same smile that had captivated him 45 years ago. "How was your day?" she asked, brushing dirt from her hands. "Good, helped a young couple get settled. They reminded me of us when we first started out." He moved to her side and took her dirty hands in his, not caring about the soil. "Still feel like the luckiest man alive every time I come home to you, and I feel like the luckiest woman." Clara went up on her toes and Colton bent down so she could kiss him. "Now help me with these tomatoes. They are growing faster than I can stake them." They worked together in the garden as the sun set, moving slowly but comfortably, two people who knew each other's rhythms so well they barely needed to speak. When darkness fell, they went inside and sat on their old couch, Clara's head on Colton's shoulder, his arm around her, their hands linked together. "I have been thinking," Clara said quietly, "about the future, about what comes after." "After what?" "After us, after we are gone. I want to make sure our story is not forgotten, Colton. I want our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know that real love exists, that it is possible to find someone who will fight bears for you and hold your hand like it might break. That strength and gentleness can exist in the same person." "Our family knows," Colton said, but Clara could hear the emotion in his voice. "I know they do. But I want them to never forget. I want them to tell their children and their children's children. I want our love to be the kind of legend that gives people hope." She squeezed his hand. "Because it has given me more than hope. It has given me everything." Colton was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was thick with tears. "You know what I think about sometimes? That bear could have killed you. I could have been 5 seconds slower. My knife could have missed a vital spot. There are so many ways that day could have ended differently, and we would never have had any of this. Never had our children, our grandchildren, this life together. It terrifies me how close I came to losing you before I ever really found you. But you did not lose me. You saved me, and then you loved me better than I ever imagined being loved." Clara turned to look up at him, seeing the tears on his weathered cheeks. "We got our happy ending, Colton. We got our always and forever. Not everyone can say that. No, they cannot." He cupped her face in his hands, those careful hands, and kissed her with all the tenderness of their first kiss and all the passion of 45 years of marriage. "I love you, Clara Lawson. I love you more than words can ever express. And I love you, Colton Lawson. My mountain man, my hero, my heart." They sat there long into the night, holding each other, talking about their life, their children, their love. And when they finally went to bed, they fell asleep tangled together, just as they had done for 45 years. Each one's last thought before sleep claimed them was gratitude for one more day together. More years passed, as they always do. Colton and Clara moved more slowly, forgot things occasionally, needed more help with daily tasks. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming something transcendent, something that everyone who saw them together could feel. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town of Florissant threw a massive celebration. 5 decades of marriage was something special, worth honoring. There was food and music and speeches, and at one point the mayor declared it Colton and Clara Lawson Day, which made them both laugh and cry at the same time. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with several great-grandchildren who were too young to understand what all the fuss was about, but enjoyed the attention nonetheless. Carter gave another toast, his voice breaking with emotion as he talked about growing up with parents who showed him what real love looked like. Catherine played her father's harmonica, the notes sweet and pure in the afternoon air. Then Colton stood, using a cane now but still tall and imposing, and asked everyone to quiet down. Clara looked up at him in surprise. He almost never spoke at gatherings, still uncomfortable being the center of attention after all these years. 50 years ago, he began, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. "I married the woman who saved my life. I know people say I saved her, that I fought off that grizzly bear and rescued her. But the truth is she saved me. She took a lonely mountain man who had forgotten how to live and taught him what it meant to have a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. She taught me that strength is not just about physical power, it is about having the courage to be gentle, to hold someone's hand like it might break in 2 pieces, even when you have the strength to tear trees apart. To choose love every single day, even when it is scary, even when it is hard, even when the world tells you that men like me are not supposed to be capable of that kind of tenderness." He paused, looking down at Clara with such love that everyone watching felt it like a physical force. "Clara Lawson, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me 50 years of happiness I never thought I deserved. You gave me children who make me proud every single day. You gave me a reason to come down from my mountain and be part of the world again. And most importantly, you gave me yourself, your patience, your kindness, your love, your hand in mine every morning and every night. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for every single second we have had together." There was not a dry eye in the crowd. Clara stood and went to him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her with that same infinite care, as if even now, 50 years later, he feared his strength might hurt her. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You deserve everything, Colton Lawson. You deserve all the love and happiness and peace in the world, and I am grateful beyond words that I get to be the one to give it to you." She reached up to touch his bearded cheek. 50 years is not nearly enough. I want 50 more, 100 more. Forever would still not be enough time with you." "Then forever it is," he said, and kissed her while the whole town cheered and whistled, and the band struck up a waltz. They danced, moving slowly and carefully, but with perfect synchronization. Two people who had been moving together for so long they did not need to think about the steps. The afternoon sun slanted across them, making everything golden, and in that moment they were not elderly. They were young again, newlyweds dancing at their wedding reception, full of hope and love and dreams for the future. When the song ended, they stayed in each other's arms, and Colton leaned down to whisper in Clara's ear, "Thank you for 50 years. Thank you for every day. Thank you for teaching a rough mountain man how to love. Thank you for fighting that bear," Clara whispered back. "Thank you for holding me gently. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Thank you for choosing me. Always," he promised. "Always you, Clara. From the first moment I saw you in danger, I knew it was always going to be you." The celebration continued around them, but they were lost in each other, two people who had weathered 5 decades together and come out stronger for it. Their children watched them with awe and love. Their grandchildren watched them with hope that they might someday find something even half as beautiful. And the townspeople watched them with gratitude, because Colton and Clara Lawson had shown them all what it meant to truly love someone. As the sun began to set and the party wound down, Colton and Clara walked hand in hand back to their house, followed by well wishes and calls of congratulations. They went inside and sat in their rocking chair wrapped in their patchwork quilt, looking out at the mountains that had brought them together all those years ago. "Do you remember what you said to me that first time we sat together after the bear attack?" Clara asked quietly. "I asked if you were hurt," Colton recalled. "After that, you said I was safe, that you had me. And you know what? You have had me every day since. You have held me, protected me, loved me, cherished me. You have been my safe place for 50 years, and you have been mine." He squeezed her hand gently. "My home, my heart, my reason for everything." They sat there as darkness fell, wrapped in each other and their quilt of memories, watching the stars come out one by one. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew they were nearing the end of their story. Time was catching up with them, their bodies wearing out after decades of use. But they were not afraid. They had lived fully, loved completely, and built something that would last long after they were gone. That night they went to bed early, exhausted from the day's celebration. They lay facing each other, hands linked between them on the pillow, and talked softly about their life together. Colton told Clara again how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every moment. Clara told Colton how proud she was of the man he had become, the father he had been, the husband he continued to be. "If I could go back and choose my life all over again," Clara said, her voice drowsy, "I would not change a single thing, not one moment. Every joy, every challenge, every ordinary day was perfect because I shared it with you." "Same," Colton murmured, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Every second with you has been a gift. You made my life into something beautiful, Clara, something worth living." They fell asleep like that, hands linked, facing each other, their last conscious thoughts filled with love and gratitude and peace. Colton died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 74. He went to bed one night holding Clara's hand and simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out after a long life of hard work and strong emotion. Clara knew it was more than that. His heart had not given out, it had simply fulfilled its purpose. It had loved her completely for 52 years, and that was enough. The grief was crushing at first. Clara would wake in the morning reaching for him, only to find empty space. She would catch herself looking for him in the garden, expecting to hear his deep voice calling her name. But slowly, with the help of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she found a way to carry the loss. She lived for 3 more years, filling her days with family and memories and quiet gratitude for the life she had lived. She told their story often to anyone who would listen, making sure that people knew what Colton had been like. Not just the legend of the mountain man who fought a grizzly, but the reality of the gentle giant who had held her hand like it might break in two pieces for over 50 years. When Clara died at the age of 75, surrounded by family, her last words were simple. "I am coming, Colton. Wait for me." They buried her next to him in the small cemetery outside Florissant, under the shadow of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone was simple but perfect. Colton Thomas Lawson, 1846–1923. He fought bears but held hearts gently. Clara Everett Lawson, 1848–1923. She taught a mountain man how to love together. Forever their story did not end with their deaths. Their children made sure of that. Carter and Catherine, now elderly themselves, told their own children and grandchildren about Colton and Clara, about the grizzly bear attack, about the gentle hands, about a love that lasted over 50 years and never dimmed. The story spread, passed down through generations, becoming the kind of legend that people told to give themselves hope that true love really did exist. The house Colton built with his own hands still stood, occupied now by Carter's granddaughter and her family. The general store had been expanded and modernized, but the sign out front still read Lawson's General Store, honoring the couple who had run it for so many decades. And every year on the anniversary of Colton and Clara's wedding, the town held a celebration, reminding everyone of the mountain man and the woman who had civilized not him, but his loneliness. Because that was the real story, Carter would tell anyone who asked. Not that Clara had tamed some wild beast, but that she had seen past the rough exterior to the gentle man underneath. That she had recognized strength and tenderness were not opposites but complementary. That she had chosen to love someone who would fight grizzly bears for her with his rifle butt, and then hold her hand like it might break in two pieces. And in doing so, she had shown everyone in Florissant and beyond what real love looked like. What it meant to choose someone every day. What it meant to build a life together through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard times, through 52 years of marriage and forever after. Their love story became the standard against which others were measured. Young couples starting out would say they wanted a love like Colton and Clara's. Parents would tell their children to look for someone who would treat them the way Colton treated Clara, with infinite gentleness and unwavering devotion. And the mountain man and his gentle wife became more than just people who had lived and died. They became proof that the best kind of love is not the flashy kind or the dramatic kind, but the steady kind, the kind that shows up every day. The kind that fights bears when necessary and holds hands always. The kind that lasts. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Colton and Clara Lawson were together again, walking hand in hand through mountains more beautiful than any on earth, their love eternal and unbreakable, exactly as it had always been meant to be. The end of their mortal story was just the beginning of their eternal one, a love that transcended time and death and everything in between. Because some loves are simply too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves are meant to last forever, and the love between the mountain man who fought a grizzly with his rifle butt and the woman whose hand he held like it might break in two pieces was exactly that kind of love. Perfect, complete, eternal, forever.